SEO teams, I don't know what it is, but SEO is, I think, the wrong word for what everyone here is doing.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks it's just about, how do I rank on Google? And it's about so much more than that. And AI is a great example of that, because you have that mindset of you understand the model of how a search engine is indexing your site and how it looks at content. You understand how you would use, LLM generated content in certain cases, or maybe not, and where and why it would fit. That, most of your product managers, most of your certainly your social media teams, which is, you're not going to have that same level of appreciation for if they don't have any exposure to what we've always called SEO.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I started in SEO back in 94, did it in 96. So as a result of that, super excited to be chatting with Ray Grieselhuber, who started DemandSphere, which is a tech platform that includes rank tracking and a whole bunch of other things. So Ray, first let's start with the origin story. Like what was the catalyst for you deciding that none of the tools out there did what you wanted them to do, and so therefore you had to start your own? And we'll start with that.
Yeah, sounds good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So I first got into SEO back in 2006. So not quite on the same OG level as you are, but don't meet too many people that have been in it for at that long these days. But I was originally a software engineer, and I started working as an early employee at a company called SEMdirector back in 2006, which got renamed to Covario, and then we basically went on to build the first organic enterprise rank tracking platform. And so that really got me interested in the space. I left that company after 2 years, and it was my first startup experience. And I moved to Japan. I've got some family connections there, and so I was doing consulting in the Japanese market. And I hadn't really thought about building a platform at first, but just kept running into some similar problems with a lot of the customers that I was working with. We were working with one of the leading basically price discovery websites that had millions of URLs, and they had this problem of being able to accurately track rankings for all of their products. Not, you can't even still come close to all of it, but to a lot, hundreds of thousands of keywords and URLs. This is back in 2009, 2010. And there just wasn't really a good way to do this on any sort of cloud platform. There was one downloadable software tool that people were using, but it was like the most, duct taped together thing. It was kind of a mess. So I basically started with that and said, we're going to build a massive scale rank tracking platform, and got our initial traction there. And then that at the time, the company was called Ginza Metrics. And I launched that in Japan, and then came to the US and went through a startup accelerator called Y Combinator and Mountain View, and did that in the summer of 2010, and then basically been working on that since then. We rebranded in 2017 to DemandSphere for a couple of reasons, but still same product, same team, same customers.
Cool. So I noticed on the website you talk about programmatic SEO, which people generally think of programmatic as paid media, but programmatic as a term, as a dictionary term, doesn't necessarily associate with that. So you can certainly apply it to a lot of different things, especially software related processes. So I'm curious, sort of what caused you to coin that phrase for the methodology that your technology enables.
For us, it's been, and there are other people who use this phrase, and so there's probably a few different definitions. The reason I kind of settled on it is because it's a shortcut that is easy to explain. The focus of our business which has always been dealing with these problems of very large scale and getting accurate monitoring across a large footprint. So sites that tend to be involved in what we would consider to be programmatic SEO are any sort of database-backed website where you're dealing with hundreds of thousands to millions of URLs, and this would be anything from e-commerce to job search to hotel travels. Just lots of different iterations, and you have to figure out how to create quality content even more so today at scale, and also understand what your competitive landscape looks like and be able to move within that that landscape in an agile fashion. So that's kind of how we define it. Lots of ways to go deeper on that, but that's the high level definition.
Great, great. I would imagine, given the fact that you've really sort of built your technology around the larger scale websites who are looking to understand the level of visibility that their content has, you probably get an almost immediate notification, or could get a fairly immediate notification when Google's rolled out something major, right? Obviously, this has been the last 12 months have been an unusually active time for
Yep.
major algo changes. And I'm curious if when you read the industry press and you read about the algo changes, if based on your clients, are you seeing anything different? Do you see sort of a different manifestation of the helpful content update or some of the other updates that have dropped within the last 12 months? Or do you tend to see, do you sort of see sort of a confirmation of sort of the way it's reported in the press is quite similar to the way your clients are either experiencing it or not experiencing it? Hope they're not experiencing it, of course.
Some have, some haven't. What we've seen has been, I kind of think of the scale of these sites as the way you would look at like a particle accelerator, where you're doing everything at such an extreme scale that effects get amplified as a result of that. And so these updates tend to either not affect some of our larger customers much at all, because they're already doing things in a pretty good way and they've got their strategy pretty well locked down and they've got their their shit pretty tight. But other people that we've worked with or that we just happen to monitor, it's kind of a mess, and you really start to see problems that don't seem like a big deal, or maybe a little bit nerdy, like technical SEO, like kind of weird indexing problems, stuff that didn't used to be as impactful a couple of years ago. You really start to see issues like that affect people, especially if their content strategy is not dialed in. A lot of our customers are global corporations, and so they have localization issues, where traditionally localization was just looked at as like translation, which, very different things. And so all of those effects, both from a ranking perspective and just from an indexing perspective, are really getting to be quite visible. Google has become very aggressive on their crawl budget for these large sites as well. So if you've got internal linking issues, if you've got things that are weighing down the size of your pages and so forth, we're starting to see a lot of sites really get hammered by that too.
Interesting. I've I obviously it's a vast oversimplification, but sort of the last 10 years of SEO has generally bucketed things into on-site ranking factors and off-site ranking factors. And I find that the larger the organization or the website, especially if they've been around a long time, the more critical the on-site related factors are, and content included, because you really, it's more difficult to move the needle with regards to particularly link building. I mean, if something's already got 1.6 million inbound links, what are you really going to do? You have to rely on pure digital PR, pure white hat strategies. You can't even go gray hat, because why bother, right? At that point. So I'm curious if that fact has sort of changed how you think about designing the product, right? Because obviously it's not going to be about link building per se. It's going to be much more content and crawlability centric. It's going to be much more about speed optimization and all mobile friendliness and all these other factors.
Total, yeah, for sure. So that has affected our strategy quite a bit. When we came out as a platform, in early 2010, 2011, all of the platforms, especially at the enterprise level, kind of had this, we're going to boil the ocean for you strategy. We're going to manage your rankings and your links, and you're going to have a crawler, and you're going to be able to manage everything in this one cool dashboard. And over time, the platforms like SEMrush and Ahrefs have done a really good job of having that kind of thin layer across all those different areas of functionality. But what we saw over time was that there's so many problems just in one of those domains that it made more sense for us to really focus down. So we pull in some third-party backlink data for reporting purposes for our customers so they can use it in their dashboard, but we don't. It's almost not even a big deal because it's like you said, these big sites, that's not the thing that's going to move the needle for them. So we focus really heavily on SERP analytics, and that's kind of our bread and butter. We do have some crawling capabilities, content monitoring capabilities that we use, but what we see on that side is those end up being custom implementations with our managed services team, just because there's so many different nuances how those need to get set up and used properly. And it's more about using that data to enhance what we're getting from the SERP data. So that's where we've decided to focus. It's just what we're good at, and we're not trying to boil the ocean anymore.
Right, right. I'm curious whether or not you see this, my team and I who occasionally have to come in and audit, older sites that are gigantic, is you end up with sort of this legacy SEO tech debt, which is you got things that got 301 four
Yep.
content management systems ago, right? And then you end up with these sort of jump offs where something maybe got 301 4 or 5 times, and then like it ended up now it's a 404, but it's already been 301 3 times before it hits a 404. And so, remediating those kinds of issues, right, is particularly challenging with the kinds of sites that sounds like are your clients. Do you find that these sort of legacy SEO tech debt issues are big on the radar?
Oh, it's probably the biggest problem when you kind of group it up into that large category, because I just posted the other day on LinkedIn, probably my shortest post ever, but a lot of people seem to resonate with it, which is basically, I said, most SEO problems are corporate strategy problems. And what prompted that post was exactly what you're talking about, where, it's very difficult for these large companies. It's hard enough for small companies, but it's very difficult for these large companies to get their ducks in a row between executive growth teams, product teams, SEO teams who don't usually get the internal juice that they deserve anyway, to make these initiatives happen. So it's these sort of like platform level issues where someone just made a call. You've been in it longer than I have. You just see the weirdest things where it's like, why would you just de-index that entire directory? And it's like, something that SEO had no oversight over, and suddenly they've lost a ton of revenue, and it's just a mess.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you mentioned the SEO teams don't get as much internal juice as they should. I found that within the last 5 years in particular, and perhaps even more so now as a result of LLMs, that the best way to get the extra budget is to no longer necessarily hyper define it as
Yep.
SEO, but
Agreed.
define it more as digital PR, content, and social media, because each of those have their own budgets to work from. And so, the SEO team, particularly if they position themselves as the AI experts, which
Yep.
they are, typically they're the closest thing that they can get at a corporation to an AI expert often without going externally, that can actually open up an opportunity for them to almost become the subject matter experts more broadly than sort of their old school SEO chops.
I totally agree. This is one of my favorite topics because we could probably talk about this one for hours just because it's so important. SEO teams, I don't know what it is, but SEO is, I think, the wrong word for what everyone here is doing.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks it's just about, how would I rank on Google, and it's about so much more than that. And AI is a great example of that, because you have that mindset of you understand the model of how a search engine is indexing your site and how it looks at content. You understand how you would use, LLM generated content in certain cases, or maybe not, and where and why it would fit. That, most of your product managers, most of your certainly your social media teams, you're not going to have that same level of appreciation for if they don't have any exposure to what we've always called SEO.
Right, right. There have always been a lot of divergent opinions when it came to content pruning, particularly for older sites that are gigantic.
Yeah.
And it used to be that, if you were to go in and prune, or update, you might find a URL and just decide that it's stale and the content wasn't evergreen, but yet it was already crawled. And so like, why waste the fact that it's in the index? There were always differences of opinion. I've sort of adjusted my opinion a little bit on that, because it used to be like I was okay with not aggressive pruning, but some pruning. And now that I'm thinking about more how LLMs work and the fact that you're no longer just informing Google or Bing about things you want in the SERP, but you're informing Google and Bing and two or three chatbot crawlers
Yep.
about your brand and your product and everything that it does and the way it interacts with the broader universe. So even if something ended up not really necessarily ranking, there's something to be said for sort of leaving it there because it continues to inform
Yeah.
LLMs. And I'm curious whether you're finding that the SEO teams that you talk to are, in fact, changing their point of view on pruning.
There is that aspect of it for sure. I think at the strategic level, companies do need to understand how much exposure they want their site to. I don't have a problem. For me, I don't really ever get worried about the chat bots crawling sites and stuff. They're going to figure out that one way or another. So that has never really been the big concern to me. I think where I do see pruning come into play and adding value, especially in the last couple of years, has been where sites have exceeded their crawl budget, and you can just tell, that it's hurting them. I think Google is kind of undergoing a few different crises, and one of them is just managing. We always think of Google as having infinite money, but I think that they're looking at the horizon of the massive amount of computing they're going to need to continue to stay relevant in everything they're doing. And the explosion of LLM-based content is going to further exacerbate those issues. And so they're starting to get a lot more aggressive about that. So we have seen a lot of value in customers pruning content for indexing purposes and making sure that their crawl budget is optimized. But from an LLM perspective and that whole side of things, I'm with you on that. I don't really see any benefit to worrying about that too much because it's, scrapers, if they want their content, they're going to find it one way or another,
Right.
Yeah.
So not everybody, particularly the folks who aren't down in the weeds, don't necessarily understand the concept of crawl budget, and they don't necessarily understand the factors that define crawl budget on a per domain basis and how you can potentially get Google to expand your crawl budget. So I think it'd be really useful to touch on that, even though it's pretty tactical. I think
Yeah,
it ends up being an important element that people should understand.
it is. And I mean, one of the things that I think is affecting this is a lot more sites are being created with frameworks, like Next.js and so forth, that can, if you're not doing server-side rendering, can really impact that as well. So we can talk about that too. But basically, at the end of the day, Google has some finite amount of resources that are going to be allocated to crawling your site. And if you exceed the amount of resources that Google wants to spend on crawling your site, whether it's time, processing power, whatever, they're going to just say, okay, I got the general gist of it and move on. And
Right.
you want them to spend as much time on the areas that you want the attention from them, without them saying, okay, we're going to move on before they hit that point. That's kind of what the way I always try to explain it. And so the more optimized your site is, both in terms of performance and also content relevance, and then obviously moving into just structural and information architecture level things like what does your sitemap structure look like from the perspective of a crawler? How is your internal link structure set up? Do you have a bunch of orphans and abandoned pages and so forth? And again, when you start looking at these issues from the question of large scale, those really become exacerbated pretty easily. So, and then, going back to what I was talking about, the newer frameworks, the React-based stuff, I see a lot of customers struggling with not being able to properly render their pages in a performant manner, depending on which host they're using and so forth. And so, that's a rabbit hole. We can go into that one if you want to, but it's we're seeing a lot of that right now.
Right, right. Well, certainly, if you sort of would think about the mantra of the engineers at Google and Bing, I mean, they just want great content and they want the folks who are actually finding the content to be delighted by that content, right? And so that continues to be foundational from an SEO perspective. Do you find that the team sometimes need to be sort of reminded of that as a way to get Google and Bing to want your content?
Yeah. They do, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, where we can tell that to the SEO teams, and they're like, "Yeah, you're preaching of the choir. I get it. Give me the ammunition to go convince my product team and the system integration team to actually make these changes sometime within the next 12 months, best case. So that's always the struggle. And so, I'm always talking with people, and I'm wondering, like, as much as we love SEO teams, are they the ultimate customer of these types of insights, or should we be making our case to different groups, within the organization for the benefit of the SEO teams too, to actually help them so we're starting to see some engagement when we talk more with IT teams and product teams and that sort of thing, because it's they're, at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who, once they get it, can make the right call to fix some of those issues.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I actually find that different teams within large organizations sometimes have an affinity for different content types, right? And so you'll sometimes find that, like, the PR team or corporate communications team has an affinity for video, for example, right? Or investor relations as well, right? And so that can empower. I mean, after all, YouTube's the second largest search engine, right? So from a video SEO perspective, the fact that video can be created and maybe live in more than one location, both, on a YouTube or a third-party video platform, but also within the, I guess, blog, for lack of a better term, within the website itself. Are you finding that kind of, the fact that investor relations likes PDFs and corporate communications likes videos, and that ends up becoming a way that you can use that as a Trojan horse into the organization and say, hey, by the way, and HR has its own separate needs, right? Some of these departments have their own visibility needs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, going back to the SERPs that we focus on, the evolution of the SERP has been really valuable for us in being able to explain that to people, because you have all of these rich features available. You've got the video type of features. E-commerce has been exploding in terms of the different layouts that are available. There's so many things that can be found within the SERPs that sometimes aren't even an traditional SEO discussion anymore, and so you're exactly right. With video and PDF content's a whole other rabbit hole. I think it's a very interesting time from that perspective, and you can get a lot more people focused on overall visibility of content that they're creating, and you can kind of couch it in terms that are not these traditional, like, super geeky SEO terms.
Another thing that I'd like to get your perspective on, I find that sometimes this is a failure of the SEO team just because they're not thinking strategically enough, but sometimes it's a failure elsewhere within a marketing department. But they don't think about the reusability of content effectively, right? I mean, so for example, they'll drop like $200K, $500,000 on a CES or another trade show, right? And they'll be there, and they'll be, creating social media content and creating other content. It'll just completely never be thought of through the SEO lens, right? And when you think about, in particular, co-created content, right? Co-created content almost without fail comes with link building, right? Because you created it with somebody, right? And that person or organization that you created it with may in fact be highly authoritative. And so we see that there are these missed opportunities, these missed strategic opportunities, where content is either could be created or should be created or has been created, but it just never makes its way through the system. And so how do you advise companies to sort of rethink their processes and their systems to make sure that they don't miss these, low-hanging fruit opportunities?
In my experience, it does kind of come back to evaluating who really has the juice within the organization. We can I'm sure you're the same way, we can pretty quickly sniff out whether or not the SEO team is well regarded within the organization, for better or worse. And when we sense that they're not getting the respect that they should be, or the influence that they should be, we pretty aggressively try to, kind of account map to our way to more people and try to build those relationships as well, because we're not really doing our job if we're not, and it's going to help everybody if we can do that. So there's a lot of soft skills involved with that, and it's all that challenge with that is we don't have an infinite team size to do that, but the more we can do that with bigger accounts, the better.
So how do you think for those SEO individuals, particularly in-house, I guess agencies as well, right, who sort of want to become the heroes, right? The reality is that if you do a few of these low-hanging fruit moves, you can sometimes really move the needle, right? Turn
Yeah.
yourself into a major hero within the organization. So, how would you recommend people go about that if maybe they're not an extrovert, right? Maybe they're not used to advocating for themselves or advocating for budget. Should they create internal alliances? Like, what's the best
Yeah.
strategy to turn themselves into the hero?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely creating internal alliances. I think the most effective people that I've seen internally have been those people who are, even if they're introverted, I've always kind of been introverted myself, but what I find that I really have done well with personally has been when I was working on the inside, just going out to lunch together and, having coffee and just trying to get to know people on a personal level. And I think once you get past that barrier of like the CYA, CC everybody on the email string, type thing, and actually work with people face to face, which is harder now, of course, because everyone's remote. But some version of that is still very effective. We're all humans at the end of the day. And if you feel that there are opportunities to try to raise your own personal level of influence, there are really good opportunities now. Like Brighton SEO. There are other shows that are out there where you can start to promote yourself as a speaker and influencer. Start writing is another really good one. Start a blog, start a newsletter. We're kind of living in a golden age of having tools available to us to build your own profile that can get you respected as a thought leader. And it's because of that you have to figure out ways to kind of raise your head above the noise. But I still think we're in this time where there's still a really good opportunity to do that sort of thing because most, probably still 95% of the people are just too busy on their own kind of day-to-day work that small percentage of people who do take the time to do that, they're really going to stand out. They can stand out in their own industry, they can stand out in their company, and worst case scenario, if it doesn't work out for your current company, if you've built up your own influence, you can always go to other places, too, that may be a better fit.
Great. So, final question. Well, actually, maybe not the final question, but the one of the things that I'm getting a lot of in conversations around SEO within the last year-ish, but it's accelerating now as a result of perplexity, is how do I future-proof myself against what might be a very different looking SERP or potentially the elimination of the SERP altogether. So
Yep.
certainly in the cases of ChatGPT and Gemini, for certain sort of very niche
Yep.
questions, there may just be one answer, right?
Yep.
And so influencing the LLM to prefer your brand or solution when it comes to an LLM related search becomes really important. Of course, Perplexity has sort of almost created its own new SERP because they do cite, right, where the stuff comes from. And that would seem to indicate that almost like a barnacle SEO strategy would end up being important from the perspective of both sort of a Perplexity style SERP, but even with regards to future proofing, where you can maybe try to grab more screen real estate in a Google or Bing SERP at the same time as increasing your odds of showing up in a ChatGPT, single answer question. You've been getting a lot of those same kind of questions from your clients?
Yeah, I think that long term, I think long term, the dominance of the Google SERP is probably going to recede. It's never going to go away, but it's definitely going to recede from where it is now. So we're already seeing a lot of new search engines pop up that are very, very small, but very focused on solving one specific problem, like privacy or going after small sites for their index, that the early adopter crowd seems to really get a lot of value out of. And so I always pay attention to those groups because they tend to be leading indicators. But even aside from that, even with the dominant players, you have, obviously Google SERP. We see where Bing's continuing to grow, and we're seeing a lot of attention there. Obviously, with ChatGPT and other similar chat, based interfaces to LLMs. I think for a whole range of queries, they're going to be a superior interface and experience for people. Obviously, like informational type queries, gathering information, they're probably replacing Wikipedia in many cases. So you'll see that. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of conversation around, what about TikTok? And still, even in the e-commerce world, I see not nearly enough e-commerce marketers just trying to get a joint view across their Amazon and Google SERPs for the same terms. Like how do you know what your visibility is? Are you optimized across those two channels alone? And so there's just unlimited opportunity for that. There's that great white paper about LLMs that came out a couple of years ago with the title "Attention is All You Need," and that was in the context of LLMs. But I think it's more true about humans, which is basically you have to figure out where the attention is going to be in your market and what your users are paying attention to. And if you're SEO, identify where that search-like behavior is happening and start to adapt your thinking to whatever that looks like, and don't just think about what the Google search looks like.
So, what low-hanging fruit tends to reappear over and over again when you end up with a new client who may feel like, oh yeah, no, they've been working on getting the low-hanging fruit for years, right? But then all of a sudden your tool is deployed, and surprise, surprise, here are some things that can be done that might have a material impact right away. Do there tend to be reoccurring patterns that show up?
They do. I have this list of what I call the list of Ray's annoying questions that I ask customers, when I start working with them, that I feel it makes sense. And it's basically basic questions about, like, what is your strategy? How big is your market? How big is your target market that you're currently capturing? How do you know you're capturing that? All these sorts of just kind of basic level positioning questions that even for large companies, I don't always get a really satisfactory answer to. And so I'll start with that and use that as a way to help them understand it's not just about where your traffic is coming from today. People will be like, well, we're currently getting 30% of our traffic from Google search on the organic side. And it's like, well, and so they'll use that as a way to justify either their current strategy or the fact that there's not much more opportunity. It's like, well, that's fine, but where is your market getting it? I'm like, what is the total footprint available for you? So a lot of it just comes down to helping them understand what the potential footprint could be. And so our analytics get pretty involved on helping them to understand exactly SERP by SERP and keyword by keyword what that best opportunity is, so they can focus on where that opportunity is and just get the largest possible footprint of monitoring, because once you have that, then you can decide how you want to execute. But most companies are still flying, maybe not blind, but very, very myopically focused on like where their traffic is coming from today only. And I think that's a big missed opportunity for a lot of companies.
Yeah, opportunity cost and the ability to quantify opportunity cost is key, as well as understand the relative difficulty of grabbing different tiers or tranches of opportunity. So it's great that you've given them a strategic framework to do that. So what has you excited about the next year with your own business or with the industry at large?
It's probably one of the most exciting times that I can remember. I've always really loved what I do, but things have really started to get interesting in the last couple of years. We built our own AI content creator, and it was basically born out of the needs of our managed services team, where companies will be like, well, we've got this AI writer tool that's great, but it will help me create maybe 10 articles. But again, going back to this programmatic problem, we're focused on how do we create really good content that scores at near human levels for, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of URLs. And so we built a product that can help them solve that problem that's starting to get really good results. And so we're going to continue to push on that. We're going to continue to marry that with our SERP data. We're living in a golden age of data technology in general. I've always been a data guy, and so there's just like an unlimited number of cool things that we can work on. Our roadmap will never get to even a tenth of it, probably, just because there's too much to do. But it's just all these different opportunities. Every time we talk to a new customer, I'm like, well, yeah, that'd be a cool problem to solve too. So for us, it's more about how do we prioritize and figure out like that slice across enough customers that we can build a sustainable business on top of that.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Ray. A lot of really great pearls of wisdom for folks to digest and take information back, to their teams to advocate for more SEO investment. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.